Welcome back to the L Spot Show. So we're back for a second time with our guest panelist, Steve Pacheco. He's going to talk to us a little bit about what he specializes in. So Steve, tell us a little bit about your social justice virtuoso.
Yeah, man, I just believe that the world is in not such a great condition right now. And, you got to think about more than just yourself, right? But not just me and other people like sitting here, like yourself sitting here, but like the future generations, right? And there's enough research out there to tell you that we're not living in a sustainable fashion. So what's going to be left for the future generations? I would feel horrible if I knew that people did whatever they done before I came into the world, so I could come and enjoy it. And now, like the next generation, they just asked out. You know what I mean? Excuse my language. So I reference myself as like a Renaissance man. It really comes from like this culture of hip hop, like from the South Bronx, High Bridge specifically. That's where hip hop was born, and hip hop always engaged with the world around it. You know what I mean? Whether for good, bad, or ugly, and that was something that I really took to, and so that was really how I started to make sense of the world, and so try to pursue a career in hip hop. That didn't really work out so much, and then went into the managerial side. Then I wound up getting incarcerated, and so that was really the turning point for me because I'm from a neighborhood where people are incarcerated all the time, and I never knew what that experience looked like firsthand. After seeing it, I'm like, this is unacceptable. It's like you can't treat human beings like this, and so that really is what drew my passion and my fire to another level. To just what can I do, and it wound up being through criminal justice policy reform. I had an inaugural fellowship with the Vera Institute of Justice, learned how to do like literature reviews, basically looking at the best practices on a national scale, and seeing what kind of initiatives, what were the best practices for young people coming out of detention. You know what I mean? And when I started reading into that like research and literature, I started seeing narratives that were similar to mine. Single parent households, poverty stricken, people who don't have access to all of these different like social programs and outlets and things like that. And then also like a lot of women being evicted. So something that came across my timeline when I was in school was pretty much like eviction impacts black women at a rate that incarceration impacts black men. So I started seeing these connections. My mother had been evicted before, like, you know what I mean? I started seeing all these real life connections through the research. So from that fellowship, I went into the philanthropic sector. And I was a fellow at the David Rockefeller Fund. And, that's a very infamous name, Right. It's very polarizing. And I'll speak to the more positive aspects of the legacy, particularly because that was what I was mostly introduced to. That's what I saw. Everything else was more like secondhand reporting on it. Doesn't mean it's not true, but like that organization embraced me as if like I was just as good as anybody else. You know what I mean? A very white office, but like the professionalism. And when I say professionalism, I mean like the generosity, like the efficacy. You know what I mean? The level of work, everything was on a very proficient level, and they took me through the steps of basically like creating expense reports from top to the bottom, and making like decisions about like letters of inquiries. You know what I mean? So if people are putting in a proposal and seeking funding for their organization, you have to be a 501c in order to be qualified. But making all of these different decisions as it pertains to not only criminal justice, but also like the arts sector, because like I said, I came into the world like really being like hip hop everything. Yeah. You know what I mean? So they really gave me an opportunity to like just spread my wings and go to the highest high. And then I ended up meeting a lot of people from there. And like I can tell you so much more. I don't know how much in depth you want me to go, but what I will mention is I'm a part of this emerging network of global policy leaders called the Future Leaders Connect program. And that's an international program where it's me and 49 other people from 13 different countries. I'm one of the 4 from the U.S. Nice. And we got people from Pakistan, India, Morocco, Nigeria, all over, honestly. And that's really it's been a roller coaster ride to really go from one end of the spectrum to another. But it's humbled me.
So let's unpack some of that.
Right.
So let's go back to incarcerated, post-incarceration.
Right.
What were some of the, I guess, boundaries that you felt like initially impacted your life and your ability to do things to support yourself post-incarceration?
The felony, felonies are forever. We don't have a mechanism for expungement in New York. So what that means is, pretty much if you caught any kind of like felony after, or any charge really, any charge after you being an adult, where the opportunity of having a case sealed in most instances is gone, you're stuck with that for life. And so basically what that means for somebody who might have made a decision out of like vulnerability, or they're being like, their back against the wall, or really their brain just hasn't fully developed. As we know, like brain science to tell you, your brain doesn't finish fully developing until like 26, 29, you know, it's different for each people. You have to live with that mistake for the rest of your life, and everybody has to know that about you no matter where you go. And I think that that's really a disservice in itself, right? But we still got to work within the confines of that, and I think stories like mine and me being able to accomplish everything that I've accomplished despite that, or in spite of that, I should say, it really just speaks to like how messed up society is. And I think finances, a place to live, really just gaining the trust of like your community again, you know what I mean? I think it's different coming from where I come from. It's predominantly black and brown. I didn't really grow up with any white people around me. So they're not looking at me like I'm this animal, but there is a level of trust and restoration that needs to happen, because it's like, are you gonna go back to what you were doing before? And so obviously that takes some time, dedication, and true commitment to show like, listen, I'm not just doing like the good thing because it's trendy, or because like I don't want y'all to know like who I really am deep down inside. It's like, no, I actually really changed. Like that period of incarceration changed me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So to touch on that, because some people have, there's two sides to that, because some people feel that once you've been incarcerated, that's just
it's over. Yeah.
It's over. And then some people do feel that some can be rehabilitated, and you are a prime example of that.
Thank you.
But on what level do you, I guess, give help to? Because are you saying, do you believe that rapists or murderers can be rehabilitated, or are you saying just the regular person who got caught with maybe a dime bag is being like?
You can go to jail for that.
So you go to jail for that.
You go to jail for weed.
Okay. I thought it was legal everywhere, but okay.
That's just recent.
We working on it.
But there
We
are
ain't
people sitting
decriminal.
in jail right now. That's why everyone is.
There's people still in jail right now for it being.
Yes.
I got friends in the feds right now.
Yes, and now they're showing like just recently they showed Miley Cyrus's mom. She opened up this big like cabinet, and she had like weed like.
Because it's been legal for white folk. It's been legal
but
for
everybody's
white folk.
just like, so now that it's trendy and now that it's okay, are you going to release the people who are sitting up in there that just, some of them, went to jail with just like little crumbs of weed sitting in there.
Personal use,
Yeah.
But to that point, before I expound on what you were saying, because it is sad, like a lot of people don't really make it back after that mistake.
Right.
There's this legislation going on right now that they're really trying to bring to the House. I think Senator Brian Benjamin or Thomas, forgive me the name, but it's called the Less is More Act. And what it's basically advocating for is like, so there's like over 4 million people who constantly go in and out of the system based on technical violations, whether it's parole or probation. And they're basically, this legislation is going to limit like the arbitrary kind of like maneuvers that your probation or parole officer can take, like such as like if you had a felony and I have a felony and I'm on probation, like we can go to jail just for being next to each other right now. Right. And you might be the person that can give me the job that's going to keep me off the streets. You know what I mean? If you're at a address that wasn't approved by your parole officer, you leave the state without letting them know, and it might have been because you work in a delivery van.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You leave the state, you can be violated for that. So I think that the Less is More Act is something people should be aware of. But to your point about bouncing back, I think social media, it could be an angel and it could be a devil. And I think with social media, you're seeing more people who are formerly incarcerated step into leadership positions. You know what I mean? I can name folks like Johnny Perez. Meek Mills. I can name Marlon Peterson. I can name Donna Hilton. I can really name a lot of people. But the issue is when like mainstream media outlets don't really like, they don't
change their narrative.
Yeah, they don't change the narrative. They're telling the same old broken story. And I think what it does is it gives people a self-defeatist attitude. Yeah. Because one thing I can say is, when I came out, all I knew that I was going to do was go back to college.
Sure.
but I knew I had something to look forward to, and luckily I had went to college prior to, so I was familiar, right? But most folks, if they've been in the streets, they've been engaging in like illegitimate activities most of their life. It's like, well, dang, it was like I didn't really think I had a shot when I didn't have a record. Now I got a record, I might as well go back.
Right.
And then you keep seeing these narratives of like how many people are failing and not making it. It's not really encouraging. And so I think for me, when you ask how much do I give back of myself, honestly, I don't believe in pouring from an empty cup. Before, I would give all of who I am, but then you end up being left with nothing for yourself. You know what I mean? So I think I make sure that I'm whole and I lead by example so that people can see healthier examples or healthy variations of what it looks like to come home and like take control of your narrative and then push it in a particular way that you have ownership over. And so after that, then I basically lend my hand out to extend access that I have, you know, or I'll put my name or my stamp on it, you know what I mean?
So what are some things that I guess you feel like us who have not been incarcerated, I haven't been incarcerated, but what are some things that we could understand about that process for someone? I mean, I've definitely been in positions of leadership before. I've been in positions of authority. I've managed, you know, businesses and stuff like that. And looking at someone's looking at someone's resume.
Right.
And, you know, you screen through certain pieces of information. Mm-hmm. So in that sort of position, what are some things that you would like to communicate to people to make sure that we don't just overlook someone because they're incarcerated?
I think
from the breadth of it, whether you're someone's boss or whether it's just someone that you know.
I'll speak about it from two angles in particular, like being the person that's looking at this person who has this history, and then also being in the position where you're going in for a position like a job and you have that, right? So starting with the first, you really have to judge people for who they are now, because as we all know, we change so much on a day-to-day basis. You know what I mean? Like, you could be a completely different person than you were a year from now. You know what I mean? And that's like so true for anybody, not just people who've been formerly incarcerated. Secondly, when you take into consideration like America, like the United States, we are like the nation of incarceration. Like we have 6% of the world's population, 25% of the incarcerated population. So the truth of the matter is actually a lot more people who are incarcerated than you know about. And sometimes, for instance, like I said, some cases might be sealed. You may not even know that this person has a criminal history. You know what I mean? And I think that judging somebody based on that, you have to think about the larger implications of the world. If we say when somebody does something wrong and we want them to get their life right, back on track, if we're not willing to play a part in that, well, then it eventually, chickens come home to roost. Right. So these are going to be people you're meeting on the train who are asking for, can I get some change? Or, you know, and that's the funny thing. I don't know anybody that, well, I'm not saying it's nobody, but I don't know people. The people I know who are formerly incarcerated, they're not asking for change on the train. So that's something that we should look at, right? Because some of these folks have never even been incarcerated and they're there. So what do you think would happen if we box out people based off of a situation that happened at some point in their life, whether they made it knowing all of the consequences or not? You don't give them the opportunity to change. That sends a message to society. But then being in a position where you're interviewing and you know you have this against you, you need to block that out. Because at the end of the day, it is what it is, right? And what you need to do is you need to figure out what is the best way that you could spin that story to humanize it.
Right.
You need people to see your actions as something that's not separate from the mistakes that other human beings make, right? So to your point, right, this is really important. Rapists, you know, I know a lot of people who caught murders, you know what I mean, murder people, and they're actually some of the nicest people that I've met in a lot of different situations. And you'd be surprised by that, right? But that's where it gets a little tricky. I'm gonna be honest, I'm an abolitionist, right? And so it's a weird space for me to be in like policy reform and things like that, because this is like a reformist nature. I don't believe in prisons. And the reason why, before I answer that, is because they don't make people better. They actually break people and you re-traumatize people. And so if somebody already had an issue before they went in there, it's not going to look much, it's going to get exacerbated.
So what about
So you're talking about accountability. I think first and foremost, we have to look at the root cause of where an issue came from. Now, something like rape in particular, you know, and my heart goes out to anybody that's been impacted by any sort of sexual violence. But when you talk about something like that, that's a psychological issue. And I think that there's a lot of things that's taking place in society on a daily basis that could drive people crazy.
Right.
We don't talk about suicide enough, right? We don't talk about mental health issues enough. We don't talk about how people are basically, they're closing mental health hospitals and building more prisons, right? So when you talk about things like this, I feel like it's a larger issue in society. Now, if something's happened to an individual, we have to address that, and you're a threat to society. So there should be some level of removal from the environment where you've caused harm, and you need to be able to answer to that. But do I think punishment is the answer? No, because then what does it do? It's like, okay, if I feel like somebody did something wrong, I'm gonna punish them. And we know that that's not right. That's gonna
Perpetuates the cycle.
I think we're gonna all end up blind in that instance.
So to touch on you not believing in prisons, so what should be a consequence that would be good enough to make someone feel that, okay, I did this, this was the consequences, and that the buck stops there?
I think you need to have a sit down, whether it's in community, you need to have a sit down with the individual that you cause harm with first on their terms. And then first allow them to air their grievances of what they thought was done wrong and what they feel like should be done to correct it. And then from that point on, and this would be facilitated. They call it restorative justice. You have somebody that facilitates this process where now the person understands what they did was wrong, why it was wrong. Things like rape is a little more difficult. I honestly, I don't even know what that would look like.
Right.
But I think that we're really hurting the fabric of society by continuously punishing people. And I think it doesn't have to be a yes or no. Like, it could be a yes and. Like, we can hold people accountable, but we can also not damage people further by sending them to prison.
Where does that come from, do you think? Because I think that's something that is ingrained in us. Maybe it's something primal, maybe it's something religious or biblical, but there's definitely this notion that if someone has wronged you or your society or your family or your friend, then vengeance is due. Like,
right.
you know, like you have to atone for what it is that you did. Yes, but where does that need to sort of like see the other person harmed as much as you have harmed someone
Right.
else? How do we defeat that?
Culture has a whole role to play in that. When you talk about like media influence, like influencers, when you talk about, you know, visual, like people in the music industry, in the like creating film. Even shows like this, like the fact that y'all are even raising the issue and we're talking about it. I think more of these conversations need to be had first and foremost, because I think a lot of people just default to the narrative that's been fed to them. And to your point, all of these movies talk about claiming vengeance on somebody that's done you wrong. But we know that we can't act like that in real life. Right. But at the same time, if that's all that I've seen, that's what I'm being programmed and conditioned, I'm not going to do anything else. Right. And then if you have a narrative saying when people do try to atone and sit down and speak through things, they're punks, they're sissies, they're wusses. That's not manly or that's not gangster. You know what I mean? You really sending this message that whether you saying it or not, it's like, you better go get yours, man. If they did something to you, you better go do something to them. But then when people get in that situation, now we like, why did you do it? And then it's like, what was I supposed to do?
Right.
You know, so I think that it really starts in the home. I think whether you got a parent or not, whoever your tribe and your community is, people got to really start thinking for themselves and creating new like ways of coping, ways of addressing and healing. You know what I mean? Healing is super important to all of this. And I think hurt people hurt people. It's a cliche thing to say, but I think people want to see people getting punished and sent to jail because it's not them, and the pain that they're feeling and their hurt is one way they feel like they could whet their appetite and feel a little more whole in themselves. But that actually doesn't work. You're still going to be chasing.
Profound.
This was so powerful. This is so powerful, and I wish we could keep going, but of course, you probably keep the dialogue going on your social media, so let everyone know how we can follow you and get in tune with what you have going on. For
sure. So the best place to get me is on Facebook, Stephen Flo Pacheco. You can get me on Instagram, Flow Like It's 89. That's all one word. The 8 and the 9 are numbers. And then you can get me on Twitter at Mr. Stephen Pacheco, Mr. Stephen Pacheco. And that's Stephen with a V. Don't put a PH, please.
Oh, wow. Okay, because I was going to put the P.
I had to remember that part. I had to remember.
I was going to put the P.
It's all good.
Oh, my goodness. I'm just
floored.
Nah, this is amazing.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank y'all, man.
It's been fantastic.
I wish y'all the best too, man. Y'all really are great at what y'all do, and I hope I could come up here or just kick it with y'all another time. You know?